We believe brain health is a human right. We believe it's a social and economic imperative. At ABI, we're democratizing global brain health by giving people access to the best minds and evidence-based information from around the world. Together, we are distilling complex science and turning it into actionable knowledge for everyone, everywhere. Will you join us?
Welcome. I am Dr. Ronnie Stangler, and it has been my supreme pleasure to host Aspen Brain Institute's Expert Series. This virtual program was conceived during the darkest days of COVID to maintain a brain healthy engagement with you, our loyal global audience, during an extraordinarily challenging period. From its reactive beginning, our series quickly transformed into a fixed beacon of illumination, inspiration, and education. Today, we wanted to share with you brief highlights from our spring-summer series for 2021 to encourage you to rewatch favorites and to discover new treasures. We have approached brain health from a diverse and complementary set of perspectives, from molecules to systems, from basic science to public policy. Brain health is precious. Brain health is complex. Brain health can be ours. We are so grateful for your continuing support. Please enjoy.
It struck me as really weird that in mental health and psychiatry, we take care of the organ that eats the most food, but we never talk about food. It struck me as really weird that we give a bunch of medicines that often cause changes in weight and appetite, but we never got taught to take a dietary history. We never got taught to help understand patients from a nutritional perspective. And we've never been taught about the power of nutrition. And part of that is because the data didn't exist, but part of that is just a huge miss. And so I just think as this movement has gained some speed, I've gone from being really fearful and anxious and worried that I'm going to be like kicked out. I remember the first time I presented at the American Psychiatric Association. I mean, it was terrifying. And then you look out and the room was like overflow, like they called the fire marshal on us. And then the next year we presented where there were 400 people in the room. And afterwards, someone came up and said, we got a list of emails of everybody else who wanted the information. And I thought she was joking, and the list had 200 emails on it. And it was like, oh my goodness. And so then I think you move past the kind of cliche of what mental health and psychiatry is and into the reality that psychiatry is evolving rapidly, right? That our colleagues are diverse, that we have, I think, more focus on equanimity and on diversity in mental health and psychiatry. We've been so sensitized to that because of what we do. And so, so it's been a really exciting time. I feel really blessed that I've gotten to be part of it most of all.
Well, it's an interesting point you make about being part of a club, Drew, and you alluded to this earlier. Being part of a club means, or at least has meant historically, writing those prescriptions for medications that you know are likely to cause a 30 or 40 or 50-pound weight gain in someone who is already in phenomenal psychic pain. And then there's the pain for you as the practitioner.
This is really good for you. And I certainly appreciate risk-benefit ratios, and I certainly appreciate some people have to be on some of these medicines. But even in that case, like, okay, then we've got to really help them take optimal care of their metabolic health. We can't just say, well, that's for the primary care doctor, or that's for the nutritionist.
Yeah.
That's...
You know, Drew, again, you present a very compelling and accessible approach to mental and physical wellness. What are some of the obstacles systemically to implementation?
I think there are a couple that stand out to me right now, Ronnie. I think one is there's become such a powerful and I would say negative tone in how we respect one another and approach ideas. And so, there's sort of not a notion that there's not a notion which is true in the debate, which is there are lots of ways to feed the human brain. There aren't lots of sources of things like omega-3 fats or B12, but there are lots of people who've done really well on a variety of dietary patterns in terms of finding human happiness. So I think one is kind of a big barrier that people fail is the current diet culture, which is really kind of looking towards a set of either silver bullets or unknown pieces of information, or almost like there's this kind of like FOMO feel constantly, like how you're eating must be wrong. Let me tell you, something's about to, here's a new piece. They only dropped this new piece of knowledge on you. I think there's that. I think for some folks, there's just access, right? This all sounds great, but you go to a local store and there aren't these foods, or it's what prescribing the Mediterranean diet's like, why that doesn't really work. I can say like, hey, Ronnie, eat the Mediterranean diet. But like, I'm here in rural Indiana. That means like pasta, pizza, what like lamb hero, like that's the Mediterranean diet. And so how we help break down those dietary patterns and then translate them to people and help them have access, I think that is certainly a barrier. I think we've lost some of our culture of independence when it comes to nourishing ourselves. And we look at the growth and how much we really love. I think it's kind of Oedipal, Ronnie, since we're shrinks. It's like we all really just want to be taken care of by some ideal mommy who feeds us perfect tasting food. And the food industry has really tried to be that perfect breast for us, right? It's just sweet. It's just crunchy enough. I can't quite get enough of it. It's like the best mother's milk you can imagine, except, of course, it makes you super sick. There is that I don't like pointing the finger at big food because I think big food is doing just what big food is designed to do. Their goal is to make cheap food as accessible as possible and as delicious as possible. And that's what they do really well.
On the one hand, we don't want to point fingers. And in the end, we have to control what we can. But these are mighty powerful forces. And as you also pointed out earlier in your more formal presentation, these are invisible enemies, if you will. How can individuals take a stand and fight back?
Roasted vegetables, that's like my number one go-to. I think we fight back oven roasted vegetables. It doesn't get, first of all, there's the mindful and meditative quality of chopping up some plant. It really doesn't freaking matter. It could be a carrot, we got some fennel bulbs in the house right now. I don't know why I just saw them. We've been chopping up cabbages, olive oil, sea salt, drop it in the oven at 400 degrees, pull it out when it smells good. It's like 15, 20 minutes, put it under the broiler if you want a little char on there. That's how I think we battle it. That tastes delicious. I crave that every day. I guess I'm being a little silly, but I think the way that we fight it, Ronnie, is in our kitchens. And I think the way we fight it is as individuals and as communities, that we're not going to engage in certain behaviors that have been quote unquote American, like stop drinking soda. That just causes horrible problems for your health. Like stop eating things where you open the package, or maybe don't stop entirely. I ate a Snickers bar the other day. You don't have to stop entirely. I'm going to have a beer tonight to celebrate, right? It's Friday, but that we want to have that not to be the basis of our dietary pattern.
You emphasize and have just demonstrated that teaching mechanisms of action in neuroscience is critical. Can you discuss that a little bit further and explain why, in your opinion, that is so important?
Thank you. I'm very indebted to people like you and to Rich Roll and Joe Rogan, Lex Fridman, people who have been kind enough to host me and give me an opportunity to share. Because science is wonderful and beautiful, but unfortunately a lot of it is vaulted in language and vaulted in manuscripts and vaulted in ways that prevents it from getting to the very people that it was designed to serve. So one of the reasons I like to include some mechanism is because I truly believe that understanding a little bit of mechanism accomplishes three things. First of all, it it gives us reassurance that what we're doing isn't just hack. It's not hacking into something. You know, one reason I'm not a big fan of the word biohacking is that it sort of implies that we're leveraging one system for sake of another. I mean, I can use the back of I can use a butter knife to unscrew something to tighten a drawer handle or something, and it'll work pretty well. But it doesn't really emphasize the great many roles that knife has for other purposes, or the fact that there is something called a screwdriver which can actually accomplish that much better and has versatility. So that's the second thing. When you understand mechanism just a little bit, you can start to not only trust a protocol, but you can build versatility into it. So for instance, the physiological sigh is ridiculously simple. I could have just put up a slide and said, hey, anytime you're stressed, just breathe in twice and then breathe out quickly, because that's the quickest way that science tells us is to calm down. But understanding a little bit about carbon dioxide and understanding a little bit about the relationship between the diaphragm and the heart size, and a little bit of this inhales speeds up heart rate, exhales slows it down, embeds knowledge in a way that when we are stressed and when we need a tool, we not only remember that tool, but we are able to leverage it in subtle ways that end up having outsized effects. So for instance, if you're really stressed, I always say it's very hard to control the mind with the mind. You want to look to the body. Then you sort of release the mind from its own grip, and then you can control the mind again. So when people understand mechanism, they have a deeper relationship to the tool. I think it's embedded in their memory better. They reach for that tool, and then they can start playing with it, and they can start realizing, it's not simply the case that you can do 2 exhales and then 1 long inhale. That actually will drive the system in the opposite direction. And now if you understand mechanism, you might understand why when you're breathing very deeply, or you take a deep breath when you're stressed, what you're really doing is you're preventing those sacs in the lungs from reinflating even more. So when you start understanding a little mechanism, you really can get a lot of insight into oneself. Also with light, for instance, if you're not sleeping well or you're waking up at 3 a.m., you have to ask yourself, what was your light viewing behavior in the 2 or 3 days preceding that? Now, most people wake up in the middle of the night, I should mention, use the restroom and go back to sleep. That's not entirely uncommon or bad. I don't think we demonize that. But mechanism is key. And I really believe that my task and the task of other scientists and people in all sorts of communities, sports performance, work performance, psychology, psychiatry, our goal should be to take mechanisms and build better tools. I think where we are today is very rudimentary in terms of the tools. I think that someone will experiment with and discover mechanisms and tools that will allow us to accomplish the brain states we want. I think in 10 years, before we sit down or in 5 years maybe, before we sit down to do a bout of work, we'll probably end up listening to a 1-minute hypnosis. We will probably know to breathe in a certain way as we prepare to do focused work, and that we will probably need to breathe in a certain way as we go to sleep at night. I think that the future lies in understanding mechanism and applying it in novel ways. And if I just give a tool, and there's no mechanism, then there's no opportunity to be iterative and innovative. And the reason I love science is because it's innovative. It doesn't look anything. The truths are core truths, but you build on those core truths so that things don't look anything like they do 10 years from now. If I give the same talk 10 years from now, I hope nobody listens to it, because hopefully by then people will have evolved far better tools.
So we have to assume then that Costello cannot tell us how you have changed his brain. Can you share with us your understanding how Costello may have changed yours?
Oh my. Well, yeah, we're at risk of, I'll try and keep this brief, because there are a few things I love in life more than science, but Costello is, I always say, is the best decision I ever made for the following reason. First of all, raising a puppy is an experiment in neuroplasticity. It's a short-lived one, unlike raising children, which is a longer experiment in neuroplasticity.
So on that note, sir, sadly, we have to conclude, but here is to Costello to his continued flourishing, his health and his success. And here is to yours as well, Andrew. The two of you are absolutely best in show. The mission of the Aspen Brain Institute includes our commitment to the development of a brain-healthy planet, and there is no single ingredient as important to brain health as love. Our guest today is Zach Williams, son of the late actor and comedian Robin Williams. Zach is a mental health advocate whose advocacy takes many forms. His power comes from the clarity of his purpose to raise awareness of and increase access to support and effective treatment for the entire spectrum of mental health distress.
Thank you so much for having me today. I call you Ronnie. Also, I know you as Dr. Stangler. In getting to know you over the past couple months, it's been a real pleasure to really understand both the mission and the vision of the Aspen Brain Institute, but also getting a deeper understanding of where we can go through collaborating and building consortiums, supporting growing awareness and understanding of bringing high quality access and parity to all folks for the mental health services, treatment, and protocols. So I will start with my story. I think it's one that brings me to mental health and mental health advocacy through a winding journey that ultimately led to me finding healing. And really that's what for me personally was the big epiphany, that a life of service is a life of happiness and healing. I realized that that in order to commit to advocacy and finding service through happiness, I had to actually take care of myself in a very material, in a very conscious, and in a very focused way. Once I show up for myself, then I can show up for others. And that would be analogous to filling your cup before you can pour or share your cup with others, or taking on oxygen before you share oxygen with others. And that is something that was a nuanced but extremely important epiphany for me. The minute I started prioritizing myself and valuing my well-being as a means of being able to show up in my best way for service and for mental health-oriented initiatives, it created a perpetuated enrichment loop, I call it, that ultimately enables me to find meaning, to find happiness, and to find a grounded point of not only stability, but growth in my life. And so in embracing the model of post-traumatic growth, I find myself deeply engaged, both in terms of the organization that I run, which is a mental health support company focused on providing mental health supporting products for others. It's called PIM. It stands for Prepare Your Mind. Not coincidentally, it's also my middle name, not Prepare Your Mind, but PIM. It was given to me by my father because he said it sounded vaguely Welsh. And it's a nice way to honor him. I love what I do. It's exciting. Every day I'm learning all sorts of new things. The path to getting me to where I am today was a winding one relating to some trauma, but a lot of healing. And ultimately, I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to do the service-oriented work and advocacy that I find as part of my journey, my healing and recovery journey. So that's my story in a nutshell. It's been an exciting one, and I look forward to discussing more with Dr. Stangler, who I am proud to get to know as a friend.
So first, a little bit about Not Impossible. Everything that we do is based on this infatuation, this obsession that we have of looking at the things that are impossible and trying to make them not impossible. And the way that we go about doing that is very much grounded in our mission statement. And our mission statement is change the world through technology and story. And for us, technology, just to unpack that, technology for us can mean so many things, right? It's a near ubiquitous word at this point. Technology for us is what we call technology for the sake of humanity. And it is this by any means necessary mantra that we have of how do we look at problems that exist in the world, social issues, issues that you look at and you just say, that's not right, that shouldn't be that way. And then we convene teams of brilliant makers and hackers and software engineers and programmers and technologists and artists and architects. It's a very eclectic mix of people where we descend upon that particular problem and we try to solve it. And typically what comes out the other side is something that we always say kind of laughingly has duct tape or zip ties somewhere in the solution. But it is a piece of technology, either hardware or software, that creates access, that creates an ability to solve whatever that solution is. And then we try to make it accessible for people, right? Our job is not to create something that is the perfect solution, but that's inaccessible, then that defeats the whole purpose of why we exist. So that's what technology for the sake of humanity means. How can you create something that solves an absurdity and then make it accessible for people? All right, that's the first part of our mission statement. The second part of our mission statement, change the world through technology and story. Story for us is intrinsic to how we think here, right? Everybody that works at Not Impossible in some capacity has either been or now, of course, is a storyteller. And so what we do with story is we use story as that means to scale, because typically we don't enter into these technological forays with a tremendous cash reserve that we can use to buy market share or to buy manufacturing or to buy whatever we need to have it to scale, right? What we do is we use story as that means to scale. And then what we do is we will tell the story powerfully about what we're making, but we focus on why we're making it. And that why is an intrinsic part of our design thinking in our process. And that why and that lens that we look through is called help one, help many. What that means for us is that if I say to you today, who here wants to solve the hunger problem in this country? I'm sure if we were in Aspen and we were in the auditorium, many of you would, if not all of you, would raise your hand and say yes. But if I pressed the matter and said, well, how do you want to do that? Then, some of you might have some ideas. Some of you might have just put your hand up because conceptually you agree with the idea of ending hunger. But when it's described as hunger, it's this big, magnanimous issue that's easy to distance yourself from, because there's not a face on the other side. It's just this concept of hunger. But if I said to you, where I'm standing right now in Venice Beach, not more than half a mile away from where I stand, there's a massive homeless community. And on my way to the studio where I'm at right now, I go by this homeless encampment and they see me every day and I say hi to them, they say hi to me. It's part of what living in Los Angeles means nowadays when you look at kind of the homeless epidemic happening in a lot of our urban cities. And so I was driving by, I was biking by, and I saw this one guy I hadn't seen for a while. I'd never seen him. And I said, wait a second, I don't recognize that guy. So I kind of pulled over and I went over and I said hi to him and I said, hey, how you doing? My name's Mick. And he kind of went back like, what's this guy coming over talking to me? And I said, hey, I live in the neighborhood. I bike by all the time. I always say hi to people when I come by. I just wanted to say hi. And he said, oh, nice to meet you. And so we chatted for a second. I said, hey, I didn't recognize you here, but I'd love to chat a little bit more. But do you mind if I ask, were you in the military? And he said, yeah, how'd you know? And I said, well, I was in the military, my dad was in the military, my grandfather was in the military, my military DAR is pretty strong, and you kind of fit the package. And he said, yeah, I actually was. I said, what branch? He said, Marines. And I said, well, hoorah, thank you for your service, I appreciate that. And he said, oh, you're welcome. And I said, hey, do you mind if I ask, why are you out here? You're in the military. Like, you clearly have been trained to survive situations, war-torn situations. Like, why are you out here right now? And he said, that's a question I ask myself all the time. I did a couple tours over in the Middle East. I saw some things and did some things that kind of scrambled my brain. And when I came back, couldn't quite get my head screwed on straight. I started drinking, I started doing drugs. My parents kicked me out of the house. He's a young guy. And yeah, I'm glad they did. I think it's kind of helping, just kind of really the gravity of kind of what I'm doing to myself right now. It's really setting in. And I said, wow, that's intense. Well, what's your name? He said, oh, my name's Jimmy. And I said, well, Jimmy, thanks for sharing your story with me. I appreciate it. I'll come by, and when I'm coming back, I'll come by and say hi. I said, all right, take care. And so I biked, and now I'm standing in front of you today. So I just asked you guys, how many people here want to solve hunger in this country? And that's this big, magnanimous, faceless issue. But if I phrased it a different way and said, how many people want to make a donation, throw $10 into the proverbial digital hat, and on my way back, I'm going to go buy Jimmy a sandwich. I'll buy him a sandwich and I'll buy him dinner tonight. How many people want to do that? Right? Everybody just raised your hand. Everybody has access to that. Why? Because now hunger has a face. Hunger has a name. Hunger has a story. Maybe you served in the military. Maybe your spouse or friends or loved ones served in the military. Maybe you have a son or daughter who went through some trying times. Maybe you went through some trying times. Whatever it is, now there's a connection to the story of Jimmy that's not just this ubiquitous, kind of magnanimous, undefinable concept of hunger. It's something real. There's a human on the other side of that. That's what Help One, Help Many is. Because if we can create a solution to solve a problem, but do it through the lens of helping one person, and then telling the story powerfully of that one person, then people like yourself, anyone who hears the story of Jimmy or Daniel or Tempt or any of the people I'll tell you about today, now there's a chance to relate to that and say, wait a second, I want to do something. Or maybe I can help deploy that, or I can accelerate that, or I can help fund that. There's something that I can do to help make and use that solution to make the world a better place.
So when we think about citizen scientists of tomorrow, how do we teach children the skill of critical thinking? And again, this is a skill which we all need so badly now, not just in the arena of science, but more generally to address some of these more systemic and environmental issues as well.
Well, I am a big believer in critical thinking. I think it's, critical. And I think that it should be taught in the schools. And I think everybody should use it. In the area that I spend most of my time, science, I think there should be emphasis on teaching people how to distinguish science from marketing, which isn't always apparent. I try always to check reliable sources, read respected journals. Then I wonder if the results are merely preliminary or actually verified and established. I try to see if they can be duplicated or if it's a one-off. And the other thing that I work hard on is I try to push back against the illusory of truth effect, the concept that repeating a false claim increases its believability. And while some are more vulnerable than others to embracing misinformation, we are all susceptible to some degree. We must never stop asking questions, fact-checking, digging deeper, and utilizing critical thinking. No matter how secure I ever am in my conclusions, I try to always ask, is there any evidence that may refute this claim? Is there anything that I have overlooked? And this, I think the entire country would be so much better off. I feel like some of the horrible issues that we faced in the last the last year or two could have been handled so much better if people would have approached them with critical thinking.
Ronnie, could I build on Emily's point?
Please, please.
So let's imagine doing what Emily just said, but let's imagine doing it in a classroom, because there are some wonderful networks of schools that do something which is, at least in the term, the EduSpeak term, is called project-based learning. And project-based learning is a way of kids using their own agency to solve a problem. So when you have to solve a problem, or if a teacher gives you in a classroom, make a case on both sides of this argument, whatever the subject is. And kids start to work together to build that case. And they have to read, just like Emily was just talking about. And they have to determine whether what they are reading has substance, has evidence, has proof or not, and make the case. So that particular kind of learning is not the 20th century classroom where kids are not allowed to talk. The teacher talks, everybody's lined up in seats, they're quiet, and they memorize. Okay, these are two different pictures of learning. And in the picture of kids being engaged in purposeful problem solving as a way of learning, one of the incredible skills that they're learning is critical thinking. So this is a perfect illustration of the education system we had and the one that we could have that would build those kinds of 21st century skills.
Which are really important because that's what a lot of people are tasked to do in their jobs today.
Mm-hmm.
They have to think critically. They have to think out of the box and to solve problems. And if they're not taught how to do that early on, they're at a disadvantage.
When you and I met, I found out you were a doctor, but it wasn't long thereafter that I found out you're something of a philosopher as well. And you have a philosophy of medicine, and a philosophy that I would say takes has a bit of a problem with the current approach that our healthcare system takes to the doctor-patient relationship. Can you explain to me what's different about your practice, private medical, and how does that ladder to a philosophy of how healthcare might better be executed?
Thank you, John. Thank you, Ronnie. Thanks for having me here. Great question. I think, going back to what Ronnie said is that, we both come from the future, and when you do autonoetic, exercises where you go into the future and you try to imagine what things could be and how they should be, that's always predicated on the cultural, political, and historical context from which we start that thought process. And, in the world of medicine, I grew up with a mother who was a PhD in psychology who basically said, let's sit on the couch and talk about it forever. I grew up with a father who was a surgeon that said, let's cut it out and next. And so they were both healers, but they both had a very diametrically different approach to solving a problem. So I look at the world of healthcare as as a patient, if I was a patient, what would I want it to be? How would I want the entire experience to be from beginning to end? And ultimately, I believe that every person who's listening, watching, living, would like to have a life that didn't interface with the healthcare system if it had a choice. You just live your life in a healthy way. And so the truth is that isn't going to happen because there's always something that happens in our health. To make that whole experience feel warm and not anxiety provoking, and gives each person the opportunity to get the best outcome that they thought they wanted or the medical system thought they wanted the fastest, with the least amount of resistance in the circuit and the most amount of communications to lower their anxiety. So I started with this concept of, boy, the system that we have was built, it's not a system, first of all. I think, let's be honest. It's a freako system. It's not an ecosystem. And I want, in my mind's eye, I see an elegant system where the different actors in the healthcare system interface with the different actors in the non-healthcare system, so that there's a flow and an ease with which information is, received, absorbed, reflected back, and you can kind of run to ground anything there's a lot of unknowns in medicine. So I think tackling the uncertainty and the statistical uncertainty of everything is one of the more challenging things for the human brain to grok, if you will. And ultimately, that understanding of the future sense of my health, if I have a severe chest pain, am I going to die? We always generally revert to, is this thing going to kill me, whatever it is? We have this existential angst that generally underpins a new problem that we have. So private medical, the practice that I've built, tries to honor this existential angst and anxiety that everybody has when they have to interface with the healthcare system outside of the annual physical, which we go to learn about ourselves. But I think if you dig into that annual physical, by the way, you don't want to learn that something bad is happening. You want to get an A, but there's always something. We're just machines that have gears and pulleys, and there's always something that's a little out of whack. So ultimately, the way you interface with the doctor should not be once a year. It should be a continuous process of learning and education. It should be proactive. I should be reaching out to you. Like I tell people in the finance world, you don't invest $10 million in a company and have one board meeting a year for an hour. How are you going to know what's going on? And the human body's changing all the time. And what's more, science is changing all the time. And in order to be optimized for a longer term approach, you need someone who's looking at the new science, but that's also looking at you. And this is the concept of personalized medicine and precision medicine wrapped in a 5-star hospitality bracket. And you know this as a member of the practice. Like if there's a problem that needs fixing, it will get fixed quickly. But if there's not a problem that you're aware of, but I think it's a problem, I want to talk about it with you. I want to tell you the 5-year outlook on that thing if you do nothing, and the 20-year outlook on you do nothing, and you can decide. I mean, there was a big study that came out this morning, I was reading it, that showed that people who have poor sleep in the mid-years of their life is an early indicator of dementia.
Yeah, well, I read that too, and the first thing I did was take a nap.
Yeah, I actually slept while I was reading it. I read it asleep. So that's new data. They have these Oura rings now where you can measure your sleep. And I think a lot of people think, well, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I got too much work to do. I'll sleep later. And the truth is you'll wallow into this world of dementia where you can't even think, and you'll just be being taken care of by somebody else until you die. And that's not a way anybody wants to be. So right. I think having honest, realpolitik conversations about things that people brush off, when you show the science behind it, is where we come in and try to give you a real option on a great next 10 years, so you can have an option on a next great 10 years.
But I do think a lot about what is it that we can do. And one of the ways that I think about it is really, what is it that we can do to be free, to be free in the world? Because I do think we all want to be free, right? We don't want to be controlled by something outside of ourselves. And I think this is really a key point, that we have the subjective experience when we go online that we are choosing, right? But in fact, we can engage in a way that takes away our ability to choose. And this is the piece that is very hard to see, and it's very insidious. And it's very akin to the process of addiction to drugs and alcohol. And a lot of folks in the field of addiction medicine talk about addiction being a disease of choice, that essentially in that process, you lose the ability to choose. And you lose the awareness of having lost the ability to choose, right? Because of this compulsive driving need to restore this homeostasis, to get more dopamine, not even realizing that you've changed your hedonic set point. So I do think phrasing it and presenting it, as like, this is a way to be free, especially like, for young people, for whom that's so important. I think the sense of like, they're not going to tell me what to do or all of that, the parents or whoever is like, if you really want to be free, then really be thoughtful about what you're doing online, because you may not be choosing in the way that you think you are.
Yeah. There's a kind of asymmetry that's happening. We talk about in the social dilemma, that is, these companies gather more and more and more information about us. They develop these sort of like voodoo doll, like digital doppelgangers of us. And I mean, in the computer, they actually look just like matrix multiplication models, but we tried to, in the social dilemma, show them as like actual like dolls that over time, as they collect your click streams and your like your hair follicles, like it starts to act more and more and more like you. And then if it can out predict you, if they know what kind of stimulus to give you to get you to do what kind of thing, then you lose that kind of freedom. And I'm not talking about like somebody with like a mustache, like twirling it, being like evil. It's like these are automated A/B tests that are just discovering the sort of soft animal underbelly of the human mind. Right? Facebook discovered this, where they had a sales report. They're like, oh, it turns out that young women who are depressed are much more likely to buy cosmetics. And their algorithm was just finding this automatically. And because our algorithms are values blind, then amoral solutions that we found, it's sort of like promulgating value blindness on everything. And one potential solution is, and I'm always like, I just have in the back of my mind a nuance, which is just like big oil benefits by trying to put all of the responsibility for climate change on the individual, which is a kind of gaslighting. There's a way in which we need to be careful to not put all of the responsibility for our relationship with technology off of the big tech and onto individuals, while at the same time not taking away our agency and saying there's nothing that you can do. But one way I think of taking back control is how do we get to know ourselves better? This is sort of the inner work. And the two thoughts that come into my mind are insecurities and traumas. So the better that we can understand our own insecurities and traumas, the better we can keep ourselves from having a sort of a Pavlovian response. An insecurity, like if I walk around where feeling like that I'm not as smart as other people, like I feel insecure about my smartness, then I sort of want to like inflate that part of myself and like over project and be like, aha, and I will get pleasure from sort of being smarter than other people. And it'll block me from ever getting to actually feel smart myself. Right. And then, if you just poke me in my smartness, you can feel it off of me. You're going to get me to have some kind of like big overt reaction. And so a way of gaining freedom for yourself is to recognize that insecurity and sort of come to terms with it and let it go. And same thing, I'm seeing this a lot in social media these days, where one of the ways like the mechanisms by which we're getting this kind of hyperpolarization is a kind of trauma. Like trauma in some sense is a thing that you can't help but look at, right? It's like you're traumatized by it. So there's pain. So your brain is like scanning your environment all the time for when is that thing going to happen again. So, it might be, what's a good example? On the right, there's a belief that Antifa started all the fires in Oregon. And so if they're sort of scanning for that and they see like first person perspectives posted on Twitter of some example of doing that. And so they start clicking on it and the algorithm starts feeding them more and more of it. And now they have an infinite supply of examples of proof for them that Antifa is doing this thing, well, it's essentially getting re-traumatized. And now anything that's near that, or if the left says, hey, like, that's ridiculous, that's crazy. Well, they're like, I have infinite proof. So like, you're the ones that are crazy. And if on the other side, I don't know, like Black Lives Matter, the right again will get like a whole bunch of examples of like the violent parts of Black Lives Matter, while the right will get a whole bunch of examples of the non-violent parts. And we're seeing different realities. And because we're seeing different realities, whenever we hear the other side sort of counteracting their reality, we don't believe them. It makes us push further and further and further apart. And a big, I think, part of the individual way of overcoming this is that slow stepping back and thinking about all the times that you get activated, your emotions rise up, and asking like, well, why is that? And this is not, of course, to say that like, I mean, it's a complicated topic, right? Because like we're talking about traumas, and traumas are real, but it's just an interesting way of looking at the mechanisms in which our social media is like pushing all of our buttons for engagement. And it's not like somebody sat down to design it to do it this way. It's just sort of like an emergent property. Where if we can come to terms with our traumas and in our insecurities, we gain a lot of that sovereignty back.
So I absolutely agree with you that this problem will be targeted not just from the individual level and changing our relationship with digital products, but definitely from the top down, just like climate change or all of this stuff.
To what extent do you believe that understanding more about the mechanisms of the science actually can help drive behavioral change? For instance, we know that how we breathe can affect the autonomic nervous system, creating either more calm or more alertness, even to the point of agitation. How do you think the understanding of mechanisms may, in fact, help?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that it is a powerful tool to let people see, both see and understand better what's going on. So one of the big black boxes that I wasn't even able to mention in this short talk was, what is the signal that is going from my muscle to my brain? There has to be something, some signal there. That is, shifting all of these transformative things that I talked about. And there are signals coming from the muscle, coming from the liver, coming from even our fat cells that go through the bloodstream, pass into the blood-brain barrier, and start to affect the brain in certain ways. But the thing that I think, even more than that, people, I get excited about that, but I'm a science nerd. What will help people really want to do this and get motivated to do this? And actually, I've thought deeply about this because I've created a platform that allows people to actually monitor the effects of a particular workout on a range of mood and cognitive things, not as a study, but my brain. How did my brain respond to that Venus Williams Prosecco bottle workout? And how does it differ from the 45-minute walk that I took with my friends outside with my mask on a hot day? And so what I found is that people get really motivated. It's like, oh my gosh, look, my anxiety went down by 20% by that workout. And that wasn't even a very hard workout. And the harder workout had a different kind of overall effect on my mood and focus. So we are developing that technology to do just that, to bring more individualized information, but motivating information to people so they can, they don't have to, I remember getting so frustrated. It's like, okay, when am I going to lose this 25 pounds? It's been a whole week and I've been working really hard and nothing has changed. Well, that's the carrot that comes with exercise. After every workout, you can get clearly, clinically demonstrable changes. And so that's what we're trying to work with.
Well, and as you describe that carrot, I think about the dopamine provided by that carrot.
Yes.
If you are kind enough to give it to yourself. That is, dopamine is also the molecule, we tend to think of it as the molecule of reward, but it's also the molecule of motivation.
Yes.
And if you can be kind to yourself and give yourself the proverbial pat on the back,
Yes.
when you do that 5 minutes, then the carrot's a little closer.
Yes.
And
So important.
in your new book, Wendy, Harnessing the Power of the Most Misunderstood Emotion, you talk about good anxiety, as you've referenced with us, but also bad anxiety. Can you clarify the difference?
Sure. So bad anxiety. So to be clear, this book focuses on everyday anxiety. This is not a book for the clinically anxious that need hospitalization and maybe pharmacological treatment. But it's estimated that 90% of the population have experience of anxiety. That's who I wrote the book for. And by the way, I wrote this, we finished the book before the pandemic, and then, rejiggered it to address, the things that were going on. So when I say bad anxiety, I don't mean, PTSD, you have general anxiety disorder. I mean anxiety that is distressing for you. We describe it as a bad smell that that's what is that? Oh, what is that bad smell? That's my bad anxiety that's keeping me from answering, from asking the question in the meeting, from speaking out, from doing that adventure or that adventure because I'm, going out of the house even because I'm worried. It's a very colloquially defined term of bad anxiety. Any anxiety you want to get rid of is bad anxiety. And we tell you how to flip it to good anxiety. But what I wanted to go over, because you kind of spontaneously were talking about kindness when we first started this interview. So I think the secret sauce of this book is not just how to flip bad anxiety, uncomfortable anxiety that you feel is holding you back, to useful anxiety, the useful anxiety that I feel right before a talk that makes me give an energetic talk. That's good anxiety. But the secret sauce of this book is that in the last third of the book, we talk about how you can leverage your good anxiety into superpowers. And one of those superpowers is a superpower of compassion. It's like, what? How do how does compassion come out of anxiety? And I'll tell you, I realized I was already doing this essentially all of my life. So everybody has their own special kind of anxiety, even though there's common ones. And you are so familiar with that all those things that make you feel bad and make you feel anxious. Let's say, for example, when I was much younger in high school and middle school, I was very, very shy. And I had so much to say, but I was just so shy, I couldn't say it. And I find myself as a teacher spending so much time trying to engage the students that don't talk, because I know very well what they might be feeling. They might be the same shy student that I was. So what I'm talking about, a superpower of compassion, what I'm talking about is using your own understanding of your own special form of anxiety to turn it around and be compassionate to those people that might be experiencing the same thing. And I love this this idea, because in my mind, it's exactly what the whole world needs right now. We need more compassion. We need more understanding for the difficulties that we're all going through. And so that's just a little flavor of how you can leverage your good anxiety into a superpower, in this case, of compassion.
And in fact, Wendy, your personal sharing is an act of compassion. The ageist, fast forward.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Absolutely. So when I'm 62 now, when I was 56, I became acutely aware that all of the messaging aimed at people my age, the visuals, the stories, everything had to do with us being a problem in need of a solution. And I found this whole medicalization and was just infantilizing. And I thought, why is this? That wherever I look, it's pharma ads, it's AARP, it's, be scared, be very scared. There was just nothing aspirational out there. And I thought, this is really weird. Like, I don't feel like that. I feel great. My friends all feel great. We feel at the peak of our powers, and yet we're being spoken to as if we need a bag of meds to walk out the door. And I thought, this is just not right. Let's investigate what this is about. And we did. So we wanted to understand, first of all, why this messaging was out there, why we were different from it, how we were different from our parents, and how we were different because not everybody our age was living this way. There were clearly people who were, living in the way that was being described, but we weren't. So we, several thousand hours of interviews. And one of the things I like to tell people about is part of the investigation involved Tinder. And so what we did was I needed to take, I'm a photographer, right? So it's like one of the main things about people our age is, what does it look like? Like the aesthetics of it become really key. And the whole visual vernacular was just broken. And we needed to reinvent it, but we weren't quite sure how. So we had to build a library. So I joined Tinder. And what happens is, if you're over, I think it's like 35. No, I think the upper limit, maybe it's 40. I want to say it's 40. So they just kind of group everybody over 40 the same. And if you pay them like $35 or something, you can move your geolocator around. So it took me maybe 3 months. And every time you saw me, I would be on my phone on Tinder, always swipe left, never swipe right. And I was screen shooting all these people. So I became, like, if you ever want to know about Tinder profiles, I'm your guy. Like, I became the world's foremost expert on Tinder profiles of people over 50. And I accumulated this vast visual archive of what these people look like and their interests. Now, we know they're going to lie about all kinds of stuff, their age or their weight or whatever, but they don't lie about stuff like horseback riding or stuff. So it was a way to collect a huge amount of data really quickly, and to show people like, hey, this is what this really looks like. It's not, as much as we like Betty White, it's not Betty White. It's not AARP. It's a very different thing. And then we started publishing a newsletter. Our grand ambition was that, and we sent to 50 of our friends, was that our 50 friends would remain our friends after we sent them this thing. And they did. And now it's grown and we have this global thing, but that's how it started. It was very humble.
David, I have to say, your story about why you joined Tinder is everybody's story about why they joined Tinder. That's okay. We understand. We're glad it all worked out. And
my wife was amused, by the way. She just thought the whole thing was hysterical.
They always are amused, or they say they are. So how has ageist evolved, and how do you view it as continuing to evolve to the extent that you can imagine or predict or aspire?
Yeah, so we started with this idea of the profile because what we felt was missing was an example of someone from our group, how they were living, what they look like, and people could learn from that. Because my feeling is that, the government regulation, people are all like, do you fight ageism? It's like, no, absolutely not. I absolutely do not do that. My feeling is what we do is we just present examples. And story is what moves culture, and culture is what moves things like regulations and governments and, you know, corporate behavior. But you kind of got to start in this other place. And that's what we did. We said, okay, here's this interesting person. Sometimes occasionally we do famous people. We tend to stay away from that because celebrity is like it's just like a different planet. So we do people who are more or less like us, and we say, hey, they're living in this like really vital, vivid, forward-leaning way. And if you want to, you can do this. But it's on the menu now. It's like, now you have a choice. Now you know this exists. It's not an impossibility. Because, you know, as has been said, we can only do what we imagine is possible to do. And if you present an example and you say, this is this person, this is what they do, now it's in your imagination. Now it's not an impossibility. So we always start with that. And then we evolved into this sort of 360 ecosystem around this kind of person. So, you know, what do they eat? Their approaches to longevity, travel, culture, all these sort of things. And where that led me to was we do a lot of brand work. And a lot of this brand work has to do with people in the sort of science, health span space. And there's a lot of people that want to work with us. And my feeling is, if you want to work with us, you have to convince me that whatever it is that you're doing is correct. That there's some science here. We're not goop. And, you know, I'm not a dum-dum. You put me on the phone with your lead scientists and let me talk to them. Let me read what they're up to. And if you can convince me that you have a legit thing, I'm all in. And then my job is, I sort of interface the sort of science with sort of normal people. So I can understand, I'm not a scientist, but I can understand enough of what they are telling me so that I can interpret it to other people and say, this is why this is important, and this is why we should pay attention to this. And so that has really led me into this cadre of just science people, a number of who've been on your, you know, at the Aspen Brain Institute, really the highest levels of health span longevity. And I've been privileged to hear what they're working on and what they're doing.
So many thanks to all of our contributors who offered contrasting yet complementary expertise on brain health. The constant throughout this series has been their passion, their sense of potential and possibility about the future, which they convey so powerfully. Until relatively recently, we considered the brain, certainly past adolescence, as a static system with minimal capacity to change. As our experts remind us, science has increasingly revealed the neuroplasticity of the brain, its tremendous capacity for change. By continuing to engage with rapidly developing science, we too will have new opportunities to change, to flourish, to thrive. Perhaps said best by my friend and colleague, the extraordinary geneticist, Dr. George Church. It's all too easy to dismiss the future. People confuse what's impossible today with what's impossible tomorrow. Aspen Brain Institute looks forward to a continuing journey with you towards a brain-healthy planet and a brain-healthy tomorrow. Thank you again, and see you soon.